Hi everyone, thank you for being here. Today I have two esteemed guests, Dr. Rich, who is a historian and runs a YouTube channel called Burning Archive, and journalist Jerry Gray from China. He's been living in China for over more than a decade now, and he reports on everything related to China. So I've talked to both of them before on my channel, so thank you, both of you, for accepting the invite. And we'll be talking about
A pleasure.
Australia-China relationship today.
Thanks for the invite, Ali. And good to see you, Jerry.
So
Nice to
I'll
see you
do
too,
is
Jeff.
I'll
And yes,
start
it's
with
always a pleasure to come on.
I will start with a small screen share. Let me know when you guys see something.
Yep.
Okay, so 2004, I'm going to be talking about Australian economy. 2004, Australia's GDP was 600 billion US dollars. After 20 years, 2024, it's 1.8 trillion. So it's tripled. Comparing it with China in 2004, China had 2 trillion USD GDP. But in 2024, after 2 years, China's GDP is 19 trillion. So obviously, it's increased tenfold, but the gap between Australia and China is also tenfold. And that's massive in these 20 years. So Australia, the GDP growth is 1 to 2% per annum. For China, it was around 10%. In the last 2-3 years, it's 5% per annum, which is still massive. But then if you look at China's economy and how different sectors contribute. So China, EV production is number one.
We can only see the blank
Most
screen,
EV
the
cars
first
produced.
screen.
Sorry?
We can only see the first screen, the blank screen.
You just want to move down a slide in the presentation, Ali, I think. It's just showing.
You can't see anything.
Oh, we can see it, but yeah, we can see that. That's got your points now.
That's the final screen now.
Okay. Yeah, so China EV production, it's number one. Most EV cars produced, most EV cars sold and exported. Renewable energy technology and equipment production, obviously it's number one. Most patents when it comes to renewable energy. China has those. AI research and large language models. China is competing with America. I mean, both of them I consider around about at the same level right now. Advanced robotics, I think China surpasses US when it comes to advanced robotics, still number one. Semiconductor chip production is number two. I think Taiwan is number one. But yeah, I don't think China will remain number two for too long. But Australia, when it comes to all these advanced technologies, Australia is nowhere to be seen. In Australia, only 6% of Australian GDP is contributed by manufacturing. And then iron ore, Australia produces around 80 billion US dollars worth of iron ore, and 80% of it goes to China. So I'll stop sharing now. So, so given all that, I mean, it's really difficult to compete with China when it comes to technology. And you can't have an economic fight with China. It's probably better to befriend China and probably learn and transfer technology, given that Australian manufacturing is dying. China is the biggest Australian trade partner. I don't really understand the hostility towards China. Dr. Rich, do you want to take this?
Well, I think a lot of the hostility towards China is generated really out of the alliance, US alliance, and associations with the US alliance, and I guess the economic threat, and the economic war that the US is conducting against China, and really has, in a pretty bipartisan way in the US since the early to mid 2010s. The pivot to Asia and all that sort of stuff under Obama. So I feel the hostility is really there. Australia has long seen itself as an economic partner of China rather than an economic competitor of China. It's quite a complementary, and it's played a very complementary role in this astonishing growth of China that you sort of showed there with the slides, so I think it's perhaps better understanding the nature of the very profound economic transformation, but not just economic transformation, sort of social transformation, and not just within China, but within, I guess, China's role within the world, the sort of world economy that's happened over the last 20 or 30 years. And if you like, Australia has, people used to say Australia, rode the sheep's back, in terms of its wealth in the 19th century, wool and all that, and, exports of meat. In many ways, Australia has ridden China's industrial and urbanisation growth over the last 30 years or so. And the nature of China's economic transformation over the last 30 years or so is quite astonishing. And I think people haven't perhaps really only now sort of really actually coming to terms about what it really means. The economic historian Adam Tooze says that the nature of the industrial transformation in China over the last 30 years is of a greater scale than the sort of Euro-American sort of industrial revolution of the late 18th, early 19th century. So it is a historical global transformation. And I think a lot of the tensions in the relationships between US and Australia, US and China, and also China and Australia, are partly people being unsettled by that profound transformation and sort of assuming that one set of business, that we could just be an economic partner with China and it will all be fine. We didn't have to sort of trade off a security relationship or develop a more holistic relationship with China. People are starting to realise, well, it's a different ballgame now. We actually have to engage fully with China and not just sort of compartmentalise, I guess, our relationship to an economic relationship. And, we'll do whatever the US says on the security front. And I think that's driving a lot of the tension. But I'd be interested in what Jerry's thoughts are, because, you've observed some of this transformation firsthand as well.
I have. We talked at Ali, you talked in the introduction there about the 40 years of growth, and it used to be, there has been double-digit growth. It changed around about 2003, 2004. Just before I arrived here, it started to change. And I've watched a transformation, and the reason for that transformation, China was already a developed nation when I arrived here, but it was underdeveloped in so many different areas. And one of those was climate. It was the ecology or the environment. And what Hu Jintao did was he created a new policy. And that caused the double-digit growth to slow down. It slowed down to single-digit growth. And it's still maintaining single-digit growth today. We're never going to go back to seeing the 20%, 19, 18% growth. And the reason we're not is because now it is not growth at all expense. Now it is growth let's look at the cost of that growth. So that we're getting the benefit of that massive growth, but the environment was degraded, the air was polluted, the water was filthy. When I arrived here in 2004, they were just on the cusp of changing that. And that was a huge step for China to do. Now, countries like Australia have never, ever needed to change that. It's not going to affect the world. If Australia is the world's most polluting country, no one cares, because there's only less than 30 million, 27 million people there. So it's not a big deal that per capita they have a much dirtier environment. Now, we have a much dirtier environment still, but per capita, China is now cleaner than Australia and Canada, two countries that globally don't make a lot of difference. And I think that's something that Australia, with its problems with gas and its coal, and it's got energy problems right now. So is the UK, but certainly Australia has energy problems, and it's now going the other way, where China bought all the coal it needed. It did buy the meat it needed. Now it's buying the iron ore that it needs. Basically, Australia is just shipping out raw materials and then importing back manufactured products. All of those manufactured products have some part of their life, even if it's just making the raw steel and then someone in Thailand is making the car or whatever it is that they're making. But all of those products are going back with some kind of China in the chain. But it's time now, I think, for Australia to say, well, we recognize what China has done in the last 20 years in terms of what it's done for the ecology and for the environment. And I think the ecology and the economy needs to be much better suited. And China and Australia can work together so well on this. You've got abundant sunshine, you've got great rivers, you've got all of the wind, everything that China would love to have. Australia has got them. China has got all the materials in order to provide them. You could have a fantastic power generation system in there, completely free of all pollutants, and it's all done by China. And I think that's probably the thing that we need to understand. It's now time for the world to recognize, instead of using China as their own factory, China is now the person or the country that can provide all the things that the world needs.
I think that's true, and I go back to Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong's comments in September or October last year, when she was asked about the Taiwan issue, and she said that she would like to see the status quo continue. I mean, so there's a China policy in China. Again, China is the largest trading partner for Australia. Why antagonize China by giving out these statements or comments? And again, we've seen the Unitary show, China's New Year. It was a fabulous show. I mean, Australia, maybe we have Reagan that can top that, if she is allowed to perform again, I guess. But yeah, Australia doesn't really have that kind of technology. It's not just the robotic, it's the entire ecosystem. The internet, the AI, the large language models, the satellites, the military, everything is under one ecosystem, one umbrella. Australia is reliant on America to do all of that, which I can understand from the cultural point of view. But when you talk to public in Australia, especially, I mean, the people that I hang out with, they view China as a positive, I guess. They don't really view China as a negative or as a hostile nation. And obviously, I mean, I mentor students, Melbourne University, master's and PhD students. So, I mean, some of the students are, they come from China. They are amazed that Australian politicians view China as a hostile nation. So they don't really understand that as well. So there's confusion in what China actually is, probably, and then there is confusion of how the media portrays China. This Darwin Port issue, Jerry, you made a very good video about it. I mean, how do you see that panning out, I guess?
I think, well, Albanese has actually said, Albanese's Prime Minister of Australia has actually come out and said that Darwin Port will come back to Australia at one stage. He said that when he was on one of the Pacific Islands. Now, whether or not that will actually happen still remains to be seen, but it's a strong likelihood that it's going to happen. Now, what could happen there is that it could all happen very amicably. With Australia saying, look, we've got some problems. We want to take it back. Here's the profitability that you would have got for the next 88 years. Here's the money back that you've invested in it. And Landbridge would say, thank you very much, shake hands and walk away. But it depends on how it happens. I think it's going to cost Australia many billions of dollars, not just 1 billion, but probably a couple of billion or more. And the reason it's going to cost that is because they're making profit now. Nobody really saw this as happening 10 years ago. Darwin Port paid $4.5 million in taxes just last year to the federal government. It employs I don't know how many people it employs on the port itself, but there's an ecosystem around that. So there's sanitation workers, there's waste disposal, there is security, there's all sorts of electronics and maintenance, and there's even hospitality that's built up around. I think 44 ships a week coming in. So there's a lot of things going on there in the background, as well as just a port, which is bringing stuff in and out. Now look at the logistics involved, because this is all manned. There's nothing automated there. It's all manned. So the logistics, all of those containers need a truck to take them away. So there's another ecosystem there. Those truckers have their own ecosystem. They get new tires, they get new windshield wipers. All these things that truckers are going to need are not going to be needed if a ship, if 44 ships are coming in every week. I don't know how many containers, what the TEUs are for that, but there's a lot of containers being moved through that port, and that means there's a lot of ecosystem. So there's a lot of money involved, a lot of money. And if there is animosity, if China feels that this has been taken away from them, not in the spirit of good business, so therefore the Australian government have done the wrong thing and seized the port back, then there is going to be some animosity there. Then there's going to be some repercussions, and those repercussions are going to cost Darwin and the people of Darwin an awful lot of money. It will cost the people of Australia just a few million. $4.5 million is not very much in the scale of things, but it's a bad time to be doing something like this. And it certainly shows that in the last 10 years or so, I think it was University of Sydney working with KPMG put out a report that showed in 2024 that the amount of China investment inside of Australia has reduced to 2006 levels. Now, between 2006 and 2015, it built up very well. 2016, it peaked. In 2015, December 2015, there was a free trade agreement. And it was around that time of the free trade agreement being signed, so just over 10 years ago, that was around the time that Obama said, well, we're going to pivot to Asia. So the two things coincided with each other. There's about a year overlap between them. And that has caused a lot of problems. And from that time on, much of the media related to China, much of that is American controlled as well, but not all of it. That media is negative and hostile. Therefore, politicians, seeing that there's a hostile media which is agitating a hostile public, then these guys say, well, I'm going to get on that bandwagon. So populism takes over their policy making. And so, you get this endless circle of negativity, which is relating where we are now at the lowest level of investments. And investments are under threat. Chinese investments are under threat in Australia. That has to change. And the only way it can change is to move away, and it can't happen, but to move away from the US influence. Clinton Fernandez wrote an extremely good report on this. Much of Australia's investment is from North America. So North America pretty much owns Australia. Big problem.
That's true. But Dr. Rich, so Jerry touched upon the media and media reports on China. So a couple of days ago, there was a news on Sky News Australia. I think it was in Reuters as well. Sky News picked it up that United States has found that BYD is and Alibaba and their technologies are linked to Chinese military. So there's a security concern. This could be a genuine security concern in America and in Australia and England as well. But how do you navigate all that? Because you have to import technology. Australia doesn't produce that much technological products. Let's say EV cars, Australia produces none. So if you want EV cars, obviously they have to come from China or from Europe. England imported EV buses from China recently, BYD buses in London, which I think is a good thing when it comes to pollution. But so how do you navigate that? Is there really a security concern, or is it just propaganda against China?
Well, there's a lot of propaganda, and a lot of it's, as you say, US based. I mean, Sky News is the Murdoch is one of the Murdoch outlets. It's our Australia's oligarchical gift to the world. I think my experience over 30 years in government and, dealing with a lot of academics and opinion leaders and all that sort of stuff, including in this sort of broad field, is that the kind of views that we've seen highlighted in the media and on the Murdoch press, which are very much the sort of US China hawk kind of perspective on the world, is a small, influential but minority sort of opinion within the sort of general elite circles. Most people are positively disposed towards China. I was working in the Victorian government when the then Victorian government, sought to join the Belt and Road Initiative, somewhat outrageously, because they're just a provincial government, but nonetheless, and then government was also asking all its department heads and all its ministers to travel to China and establish relationships with China. The then Premier was putting in his priorities for each minister that they explore business opportunities, sort of thing, with China as well. So, and that is pretty much outside of the, what some people call, like Nell Badilla, who you had on your show, Ali, calls the securitocracy, the sort of officialdom around the defence, military, intelligence agency type establishments. Most of those people are, keen to explore the relationship with China, but I think they've been too focused on the business relationship with China rather than the broader political, diplomatic, more holistic relationship with China. And that's meant that when this aggressive campaign really out of the US alliance and its associated institutions within Australia, both within the media and within the securitocracy, has pushed over the last 10 years or so to really, go to war with China effectively, a sort of, grey zone sort of war with China. Those people have been poorly positioned because, they've just been focused on, doing the business deals rather than a much richer diplomatic and sort of, multi-dimensional relationship with China. But I actually think it's sort of that people should return to. And the people like Gareth Evans, the former foreign minister, actually says that beneath some of this rhetoric in the media and from the associated sort of institutions within government or officials and closely associated American sort of what Paul Keating calls the Austro-Americans. Outside of that, there's generally a pretty strong relationship between China and Australia, but one with significant tensions nonetheless, which are partly political, partly related to the military issues, partly dealing with the fact that, well, we are chained to America, and so if something really does go wrong in terms of the military relationship between US and China, we will get dragged in, and we have to plan for the consequences of getting dragged in. But generally, it's pretty good. But there is also, I guess, a general concern that not just in Australia but around the world, that the kind of the extent of reliance on Chinese manufacturing and Chinese technology is, a little bit is skewed, I guess. And so there's a lot of talk from around the world around, de-risking and diversifying and, having a second option on supply chains and all that sort of stuff. And ultimately, I think that will be a set of issues that can be, assuming America doesn't do anything really stupid, can sort of negotiated through. Because China itself, China is not going to have, the next 30 years for China is not going to be like the last 30 years because, a lot of its industrial growth has partly been about urbanization. And so the things, they're moving into different industries, different technologies. Exports is not as much a big deal for its economy. So the nature of the actual economic drivers of the relationship will also be different as well. So I think there's this sort of balancing act, I guess, between the internal push and pull within the sort of elite circles, between generally recognising the obvious reality that China is an essential partner to Australia's future, and quietening down the sort of the American extremists, let's call them, within the security establishment, while at the same time also saying, the Asian century is not just about China. It's also about India. It's also about Indonesia. It's also about Japan. It's also, maybe someone will sometimes realise that, Russia is part of Asia too. It's about diversifying those networks and maybe pursuing a more, what people call a multi-vector sort of diplomatic relationship.
No, that's true. Just one statement before I go to Jerry. So China has, in my opinion, shown the world that there is an alternative path to progress through trade and through business partnerships. So you've talked about Asian century. So after China, Vietnam is coming up faster than anyone could have imagined, because Chinese business people are setting up industries in Vietnam. So China obviously is still the world's factory, but the lower valued consumer goods, most of them are going to be probably manufactured in Vietnam now, whereas I think China is going to focus on higher value consumer goods such as EVs and all these advanced technologies. So Jerry, a couple of days ago there was a news in Australia about Chinese secret police. Now, we've touched that in our past conversations, but this time they've come back with evidence. So there's a company called Hungry Panda in Australia, food delivery service. So many Chinese students work for Hungry Panda. So they were talking on WeChat with each other, trying to see if they can organize a protest to have better wages and improve their working conditions. So they got messages from Chinese police from China, and some of their relatives were questioned in China that, and the message was that don't do a protest against Hungry Panda. It doesn't look good. Not sure whether there was presence of secret police in Australia, but they got messages from China. What do you make of that? I mean, there is some evidence now. I mean,
evidence of communication is not evidence of nefarious intent. I think that's the best way to look at this. Is the Hungry Panda a Chinese-operated corporation that's basically servicing the Chinese market, or is it a Western company that is invested by, I don't know enough about it, might be a Western company that's invested by Chinese people, and that's why it has this Chinese-ified name. So we're all, the China thing is becoming bigger around the world as well. But there is no question about it that the Chinese are very, very good at group communication. And I don't see anything nefarious about this. It depends on what you're trying to achieve from this. If Hungry Panda is a Chinese corporation and they don't want, I can't see the government getting involved, but I can see people getting involved. If I'm an investor, if I'm a Chinese parent and I'm a rich Chinese parent who can afford to send a child to Australia, because remember, only the rich ones can. So the rich ones are invested in some companies. So if my son or daughter is in Australia and in a group talking about protesting against this Chinese company, I might send a message in that group saying, I think it's probably not a good idea. Don't protest against Chinese companies. We've got enough problems of our own. Putting myself into a Chinese parent's mind, we've got enough problems of our own in Australia without you creating another one. That would be the kind of information that I, as a Chinese parent who is rich enough to invest in my child's education in Australia and a corporation that's operating in Australia, then I think that's probably what I'd be doing. So I think we need to look at what was the intent of that communication. How deep does it go? Are there tentacles going into government? And even if there are, this is no different to what America does anyway, what Britain has been doing for 400 or 500 years, what Spain, Germany, France, Belgium, all of them did when they were colonizing. They would send dispatches out to their people. Okay, it took 6 weeks to get to Australia, but the same sort of thing was happening. It was just happening slower. So I think probably we need to look at that evidence. I often find, because I was a police officer, I've stood in many courtrooms and I've had to provide evidence. There is a very, very big difference between what is actual evidence and what is an allegation that may be tested and found to be evidentiary of value, but generally speaking, they aren't. A lot of things are hearsay. A lot of things are simply just communications. That doesn't necessarily mean there's any foreign influence involved. It just means that people are communicating, and the Chinese are extremely good. It'll be in WeChat groups. And if it's in WeChat groups, it's not secret. People can see this in the group. So it's not like they're being secretive about this. And as for this secret police stations, I still haven't seen any evidence of that. I saw one girl got arrested in Canberra, and she's been interviewed by media, and all I want is a simple life. She seems like a fairly normal, basically just a graduate school kid who's gone to work. I think she worked in a flower shop or something like that.
Yeah.
What harm is she going to cause? Maybe she's just a tiny cog in a very big wheel. I don't know, but we'll see what happens. But 9 times out of 10, when these things come, there's massive headlines, and then a year later, court cases get dropped. Alexander Serko is another example. Whatever happened to him? He was kept in custody for a year. He was writing reports for some people and receiving money in brown paper bags of some sort. And he claimed that it was all just, he wanted to get out after COVID, all this kind of stuff. He's a businessman from Bondi, the world's most famous beach now, or most notorious beach. And he had 4 charges against him, and he was kept in custody for a year. 3 of the charges were dropped. The 4th charge, I haven't seen any news headlines, and I have looked. To see what happened to that guy, and I cannot find what happened to him. He's just disappeared off the face of the earth. So this is what happens. We get these massive headlines. Look at the evidence against China. And then a week or a month later, the charges are dropped, everything disappears. And it's only when it does go to court, and there's a couple of, Sunny Duang is another one, who went to court, and as far as I can see, but there was a short part of that court, or that court case was in camera, so we don't know what he was doing. But as far as I could see, he was a normal Chinese business, or in fact, he wasn't even Chinese, he was Vietnamese of Chinese origin, and he was donating to the community. So I'm still not sure why he went to prison. So there's cases like that, massive headlines. It all fizzles out, but the headline has done the job. That's all they needed, was the headline.
In a way, I guess one of my questions about this case that you've mentioned, Ali, is like how are sort of wage and conditions, labor disputes sort of resolved in within China. I don't really know. I have heard that there have been, some there's a spectrum of opinion within China, and there are some, if you like, on the sort of industrial left, if we could call it that, who aren't terribly happy with the way in which wages and conditions are managed within China itself. And so I don't really know what that is. Maybe, Jerry, you got some observations on that. But it's an interesting case too of how if we only focus on the sort of economic relationship without the broader social and political context, we end up or the security relationship, we end up turning a kind of a social dispute about wages and conditions within a Chinese company into an espionage case, rather than sort of understanding it in a different context. And the fact that and we're very aware of this in Australia. I think, as I've discussed with you before, Ali, because we've just got a high migrant population, a high international student population, all the rest of it. The the reality of the world today is, internal issues within countries are sort of spread around the world, so to speak. And so we all have to come to terms with actually understanding, not seeing, internal tensions within a country always in this sort of dramatic, China and America are about to go to war, or just simply misreading it and misunderstanding it as well. And that's where I think, we really need to develop a deeper, in Australia, we need to develop a deeper relationship with China in terms of its political system, so we actually understand, well, how do they solve labour disputes in China, and social thing, and also the cultural stuff. So what Jerry's saying about the sort of WeChat sort of discussions, we can read the situation so much better and not come to these hysterical misunderstandings that seem to be so common in the media.
Yeah. So Hungry Panda, it's a global company started by a Chinese origin person in UK. So it's headquartered in London. So obviously it has investors from around the globe, including Chinese investors as well. But I see it as, like you mentioned, labor and wage dispute. Like, we had strikes from Uber gig members as well. So it's the same thing. And we are talking about gig economy over here. So Uber Eats, DoorDash, Menulog, they don't really treat their employees as their own employees. They are contractors. So there will always be a dispute between working hours, hourly rate, and some of the working conditions as well. So I saw it in the same light as, we had protests against Uber Eats and the Uber taxi service as well. But that wasn't characterized as when Uber tried to suppress the protest or took it to court, it wasn't characterized as American interference in Australia or American interference around the world. It was characterized as a company or business dispute, I guess. But I think over here, because it's China, I think, like you mentioned, it may have been mischaracterized because there was no evidence of, so far they haven't really presented any actual evidence of Chinese police presence in Australia. It was just communication via WeChat and family members of those people who were working for Hungry Panda in Australia getting questioned by the police over there. And like Jerry mentioned, their parents were calling the children over here. What are you doing over here? We've got enough problems over there already. So I saw it like that. I was comparing it with Uber Eats and Uber Taxi and DoorDash kind of thing. But I guess it's a cultural thing, I guess. Whenever there's China involved, you have to go to level 10 straight away from 0 to 10.
Yeah, and it's quite mischievous. And like both the Murdoch press and the old Fairfax Channel 9 press and the ABC, frankly,
ABC.
the sort of public broadcaster are all just appalling on China. They're pretty bad on India, and they're also really bad on, like, they're just off the charts bad on Russia. And I just think it's a real problem in terms of the Australian public's ability to understand what's going on in the world. That we get these and it's a conscious editorial. I mean, things like this aren't happening. These kind of stories aren't happening by accident. It's sort of orchestrated opinion shaping kind of dramas, or even if it's just doing what is sensational and popular and gets clicks, it's still an orchestrated drama, and it just creates a very distorted and a poor footing for a genuine, more effective multilateral relationship with other countries.
Can I add something to this?
Yeah.
The gig economy. I left the UK in 1987. I went to live in Australia in 1987. So literally 4 or 5 days later, I arrived in Australia and started work. And as a British person, I'd never heard the term casual. Now, in Australia, you'd know what this term means. To be a casual means you don't have a contract, or you do have a contract, but you don't have any labor hours. Now, this gig economy is huge. But 1987, I'd never heard of this. I came out of the UK where if you had a job, you had a job. You didn't even have to sign a contract. You didn't have a contract for a job. You just got a job. Now, of course, there was paperwork involved in that, but you didn't sign a 1 or 2 year contract. You got a job. Or you didn't have a job and you were unemployed. That was what it was back in 1987 when I left the UK. I arrived in Australia and I saw this thing called casuals. And I actually got a job as a casual. I was a former police officer and I got a job as a security guard as a casual. And for me, it changed quite quickly. I got into the permanent role, and then I went through the ranks of the system, and I finished off quite well. But the fact was, there's a lot of people permanently casual, if we could use that word, permanently casual. There's an oxymoron for you. So the gig economy has taken off in Australia in a way that is very different to how it's taken off here. Yes, it did start here, and there were problems. There were industrial relations problems, massive industrial relations problems. You get to hear about the guy who died on his bike after working 17 hours or something like that. You get one story and it's amplified as that's China. Well, of course, it's not China. But what China did, it created a gig economy legislative realm. So now I have 2 friends. One is my next door neighbor, who is a driver for SF Express. And just around the corner, I go to a little egg shop. I buy my eggs by the tray, 22 RMB, which is about $4 for a tray of eggs, 30 eggs on my tray. And I buy from this egg shop. There's a husband and wife team. He works the shop most of the time, but when she's there, he's got his express delivery. So if one of the restaurants calls up and says, we need an express delivery, if she's in the shop, he takes the job and goes. That's how the gig economy should work. He's got a job. He can get away from it. He picks up a job. He's got a full-time job in his own shop. He runs his own business, and he's got a part-time job where he can add to the income by just jumping on his bike and going, taking a delivery, because there's a lot of restaurants nearby. He picks up something from the restaurant, does, and he might get 2 or 3 gigs, and then he gets back to the shop and sells more eggs. That's how the gig economy ought to work. It should not be a way where people can be abused and exploited, which is what the gig economy does do. In the UK, they have this thing called 0 contract hours. In Australia, you have the gig economy, and you have a lot of industrial relations. Now, that guy who lives next door to me, is an SF Express driver. So he's got a full-time job. He's got a motorbike outside, which has got the SF Express. It's parked out there now because today's a holiday, and there's no deliveries going on. So he's got a holiday. My egg shop is open every afternoon. He opens up about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and he stays open until 10, 11 o'clock at night. And If his wife is there, the bike is sometimes gone. He's off doing some deliveries. So you look at these two people. One of them has a proper job. He has proper social security. It's not a superannuation, but it's a pension fund. He has health care. He has a housing allowance because he doesn't own the house next door. He's renting. So that when you don't have a home, your company must put a housing allowance in there for you until you buy your first home. So Chinese people have got much better terms and conditions. Now his salary would be much less. He might get 2 RMB a delivery or 3 RMB a delivery. I don't know. I've never asked him what his salary is, but it would be much less in real terms. He might earn a couple of $1,000s a month. He might earn $500 a month. I don't know. But he seems to do okay. He lives in a nice apartment next door to me. He rents that apartment. He has a wife and a child and a grandparent living there as well. The wife goes out to work. So the grandparent is there. So between them, they have enough money. And when they're ready, they will buy, probably for cash, an apartment. Or if they don't buy it for cash, they'll borrow money from family members rather than the bank. So most people here buy an apartment. So this is a guy who's just a delivery driver, nothing more. But he's living in quite a nice apartment. He's living there with his family. He doesn't seem to be short of anything. And he goes out to work in the morning and he comes back in the afternoon. He has a proper job. Around the corner, we have a guy who is doing what the gig economy should be doing. He's picking up extra work because he has a proper job. That's the way it works in China. So, yeah, you do get to hear stories. And you get these people who, this guy was so good because he worked 16 hours a day. That's wrong. We shouldn't have to be working 16 hours a day. And that's what China recognizes. There are limits to what you're allowed to do. And every single person in that gig economy has superannuation, has healthcare, has housing allowance, has maternity allowance if they're females, has unemployment benefits, unemployment insurance. So they're all included. And that's what the industrial relations laws do here in China. Very different to the West. They actually protect the worker, not the company.
Yeah. And when you say the West, Jerry, I mean, especially I think with industrial relations legislation and social institutions, social policy generally, I think it's pretty good. It's really important to distinguish between the United States of America and every other country in the world.
When I say the West, I usually mean my countries, UK and Australia. In America, you get no protections whatsoever.
But it's a classic case of because Murdoch's now an American citizen and wants to sort of influence global politics and so much of our media in Australia, at least, so much of our media is really viewed through American eyes, and with YouTube, etc. Just the preponderance in the English language YouTube world of American perspectives, just out of numbers, means that we often see social issues like labour market regulation and social policy, healthcare, worker conditions, the management of migration through the lens of the United States. But the United States is just an absolute basket case on all of these issues. I mean, the last election, they were talking about no tax on tips, and the reason they're doing that is because there's a huge proportion of the labour force that is reliant on tips income, which is totally unregulated. Like it's just the generosity of the customer, and that's what your income's based on, rather than a living wage, as people used to talk about in Australia. And even the sort of ICE, the crackdown on illegal migration, a lot of that is also driven by the failure to properly regulate the labour market, because a lot of those illegal migrants are employed in the homes of Americans and in the service industries of Americans on pretty lousy working conditions. So and then there's all the resentment about the fact that they're taking our jobs and all this sort of stuff. So I think it's an interesting example of if we look at everything through American eyes, we actually don't see the world as it really is, especially China as it is, which has a whole set of different social institutions because, it's a socialist country, especially in relationship to, social arrangements, labour and capital relationships, worker organisation, the way in which social welfare to some degree is delivered through the workplace as well.
Yeah, so the tipping culture, I'll just make one statement. I've seen it come to Australia more and more, I guess, because of Uber Eats, DoorDash, all these services.
Yeah.
So obviously it's an American thing. And I didn't really understand, why do you have to tip people in America? Because they don't pay them well. Why can't you just increase the price of coffee, sandwich, and pay them the proper hourly rate? But no, you won't do that, but you would expect the customer to pay 10%, 20% tip. So the cost of the product that or service that the person is buying, is then at the end product is still the same, whether you increase the cost of the product on the menu or you add it as a tip. But I guess because they don't want to pay their workers, they don't treat their workers really well, and they're pushing it in Australia as well. Whenever you take Uber ride, you have to you've got the option of tipping the driver as well. Why don't you just pay them well? I mean, don't really understand that, but that's unbridled capitalism in my view. If it's unbridled, people at the top are going to squeeze as much money as possible from the people at the bottom.
Sorry, Jerry. A lot of that culture has been imported into Australia, Australia's political culture over the last, 30. I mean, I've witnessed it in government over the last 30 years or so. With the sort of the sort of free market ideologies, celebrating the sort of American model, and it underpins a lot of the tension between Europe and the USA, about, all those lazy Europeans with their social welfare who just happen to live 5 years longer on average than we do. I wonder why.
One of the things I love very much about China is that there is no tipping culture. In fact, when I first started dating my wife 20 years ago, I would get a taxi somewhere because I don't drive a car in China at all. There's no need. So I'd get, if the taxi fee was 8 RMB, I would just hand him 10 RMB and get out of the car. And my girlfriend at the time would wait for the change. I was, what are you doing? I'm waiting for the change. And she made this point to me, why would you think that your 1 or 2 RMB will make a difference to him? Does that make you richer than him? And, you're insulting him by doing this. And, once you start to look at it from that perspective, why did that guy give me $1, 1 RMB? 1 RMB might be 10% of the value of the drive. But, for me, it was just loose change. It's nothing. But to the driver, it's an insult that you give them a tip. However, it has started to change a little bit. And we do give tips sometimes now. Don't have to, never have to. But the other day, for example, public holiday, we got a ride back from my mother-in-law or father-in-law's house on a DD car, which is the same as your Uber. And we're in this DD car. The driver was really nice. He helped us to put stuff in the back. He was a nice guy, chatting. And it's a public holiday. And he said he was going to wait until the end of the holiday and then go home and have a holiday with his family. So he's going to take some time off, but he's hoping to make a bit of money during the holiday, and he's done all right. So we got to the end of the drive, and it's all done automatically. You can buy him a bottle of water, you can buy him a bowl of noodles, or you can give him a 10 RMB tip. So we gave him a 10 RMB tip because it was a holiday, and you don't have to do any of this. And when it's pouring with rain and we don't want to go shopping or go to the restaurant and we get food delivered, we always give them a little bit extra. So you don't have to do it because their income is enough. But you realize that, when it's 42 degrees out there and these guys are working hard, give them a little bit extra, buy them a bottle of water. They don't get a bottle of water, they get the value of the bottle of water, and they get 100% of it as well. That's the other thing. Their company doesn't scrape off the little bit of profit margin on the top. They get 100% of it. So that kind of thing, I kind of like it. You have the option and the opportunity to reward someone for a service that they've done rather than contribute to their income because they gave you good service. Well, they should be giving you good service and getting a decent salary for it. I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah, but just on that Europeans living longer, it was funny when J.D. Vance said that Greenland will be better off becoming part of America. Greenland has better healthcare, free education, better paternity leave, better everything.
Yeah.
America doesn't have any of those. Education is a business in America, just like in Australia, I guess.
Yeah.
But how will Greenland be better off becoming part of America?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Certainly
but
the
then
Greenlanders
I
don't
want to
think
talk
they
to
will
you.
be.
Yeah, exactly. Jerry, I want to talk to you about AUKUS. What's the purpose of AUKUS?
You're asking me.
Yeah.
I believe AUKUS is the greatest bait and switch in history. Certainly the most expensive bait and switch carnival game in history, where America says, we're going to protect you, we're going to help you out here, take all of the money, and then provide nothing. I cannot see, I have not yet had anybody explain to me what the benefit of AUKUS is, why it's necessary. I do understand why they need submarines. They've got a huge, great coastline. I don't understand why they need attack submarines to defend their coastline, which is what a nuclear-powered submarine is. I don't understand why the French naval submarines, which were perfectly good for the purposes, suitable for purposes, were already in production. Already deposits were paid and everything was going according to plan. They'd gone through the process. What is AUKUS now? AUKUS to me seems now, and I can't say it wasn't a Trump thing. It was a Biden thing. It wasn't a Scott Morrison thing. It is an Albanese thing. It has transcended governments. It's transcended the changes. So it effectively proves to me that somewhere behind the scenes there is a far bigger thing going on than governance. And as far as I can see, it's a bait and switch. We're going to take your money. We're going to offer you something, take your money, and give you something else. That's AUKUS to me.
I think it's consistent with the general US strategy at the moment, which is basically, I think Elbridge Colby almost said this explicitly, more or less in these terms at the Munich Security Dialogue where he spoke, which is, America is looking around the world and it wants its wealthy allies to pay more, put up more. And AUKUS was one of those first cases. I mean, AUKUS is kind of like Australia's version of increase your NATO spending to 5% or something in Europe. And I think it was also got caught up with electoral politics, probably, of sort of like doing a big deal, a prestige-oriented deal. But also, the nuclear submarine or the submarine fleet is like this, decades-long fiasco in Australian defence policy as well. Big long-term decisions, and Australia hasn't had a particularly good track record of getting any of those sort of decisions right. So there were probably no doubt frustrations with the nuclear submarine, and then with submarine issues, there are always these lobby groups from both sides of politics and the unions and businesses to get a share of the defence industry contracting as well. So the sort of local manufacturing component is always a factor as well, which I think was a factor in choosing France over, like, I think at one point Tony Abbott was proposing to get pretty deployable Japanese nuclear submarines or something. And, they went for France because they wanted to have some sort of defence industry in South Australia and all this sort of stuff. So there's just this long series of bad decisions about it. But I think the fundamental driving factor was this desire for Australia to show itself to be the best student in the room, who the teacher's pet, who was going to do more for the American alliance. as America sort of realizes, or the USA realizes, it can't pay for this massive global military network all by itself and run it all by itself. It's got to get its wealthy allies to pay more, which is pretty much what they've directly said.
As long as they need defense, they need to share the cost. I accept that. I don't have a big problem with that. But they're not building defense, they're building offense.
Yeah.
And that's the big thing. Now, if they're going to build defense, then they need to spend a lot less, as China does, spends a lot less in terms of per capita, a lot less in terms of GDP, a lot less in terms of actual physical cash. It spends a lot less because it's not building stuff to go around the world and set up bases anywhere else. It has one base in Djibouti.
Exactly.
We've argued many times, or I've argued many times about, it's got a base in Cuba, it's got a base in the Indian Ocean. It doesn't. It's working with other countries with communications. It's working with other countries in signals. Yeah, it's got all of that. But what's wrong with that? The UK's got that. Britain's got that. France has got that. Every other country's got that. Nothing wrong. They're not setting up bases, military bases, anywhere else. So when you start doing that, then your costs go up. And that's why Japan has to pay more, Korea has to pay more, Australia has to pay more, because they are paying to be secured by America, by the USA.
But against whom?
Yeah. The right
against...
question is not how much you spend, it's what do you spend it on?
What's your bang for your buck?
And this is where like Sam Roggebean's and Hugh White's argument to some degree, I think, is just, very widely accepted in influential circles that, it's the wrong defence sort of strategy. We can do cheaper, more effective, defence and more implementable, and sooner, more timely defence strategies by focusing on, a different submarine fleet that patrols the coast of Australia rather than
by focusing on defence.
Threatens China.
That's right. Let's focus on defence for our Defence Department. What a noble thought that would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess because all that money could have been better spent on Australian public, better suburbs. I mean, I drive around in Melbourne. There are potholes on motorways. Motorways have potholes. M1, M3, let alone the suburbs. I don't know how governments can get away with that. I mean, potholes on motorways. Absolutely.
You have to blame the state government for the roads and local governments for roads.
Yeah, I mean, over the last 10 years...
You can't blame Canberra for that one.
Blame China. Everyone else does. They probably sold you the tarmac cheap.
Yeah, there's a lot of corruption in government circles anyway in Australia. Every week you hear stories of contracts gone wrong, then you try to dig deep into it, and then you realize, okay, they were paid off. So, cutting corners, stuff like that.
I think that exists everywhere, Ali. I mean, there's no question about it here. We get a lot of work done on our roads. Our roads are pretty good. You get some pretty bad ones, of course. I mean, I've seen them all. But generally speaking, you won't see potholes on a motorway. They're very, very good. They're very smooth. They're great here. So, it's pretty good. But then we've just had a recent example near me, about a kilometre away. There's a road which has been dug up about 4 times in the last 10 years. And you can't help thinking they dug that up just 2 years ago and now they're doing it again. Something was deliberately missed. You can't. My wife is quite convinced, they do that on purpose. That is all just corruption. They will finish the job and then leave something out so they can come back and do it again. That's the level of corruption. I wouldn't dispute that either. I think it goes on everywhere. They're trying to stamp it out, of course. Go on, Jeff.
Yeah. I think with the roads, it's partly, like Australia's a very big place, which is very dependent upon road transport, has a very large road network and a relatively small population. And it's a constant and very politicised dilemma because, which road gets improved when, kind of which backbencher lobbies hardest to get their sort of road improved when. it's just a rationing issue. Like you can only maintain so much road at so much cost, at so much speed, sort of to some degree. So there will be potholes that will emerge. So I think with that, it's more just it's a rationing problem rather than a corruption problem.
I think in suburbs, what I've noticed is in my suburb, they built a road on Monday, opened it on Tuesday. Tuesday night, there was a big pothole. So how can a pothole happen in one day? And there's a corner where they've built that corner, I think, 10 times. Whenever it rains, there are potholes. The best roads that I've driven were in Saudi Arabia, because if something goes wrong over there, contractor just gets disappeared. You never hear about that contractor again.
That's the way to
The
do
roads
it.
are excellent in Saudi Arabia and in Manchester also, even though they've got a really bad weather, freezing and all that kind of. Manchester roads are good. London roads are really good. And Australia, I don't really understand, obviously it's a rationing issue as well, but there's some corruption also when it comes to maintaining roads in suburbs. But yeah, well, and I want to talk about a bit more about Australian journalism, but I can be running out of time. So maybe next time if we get a chance, because I've got stories of Australian journalism gone bad or intentionally gone bad, I guess, because they never follow up a story. Like I think you were mentioning, there's a headline and there's a body. After 2-3 weeks or 2-3 months, what happened? No one knows. It just disappears. Correct. Like that. Right.
Yeah, they're very good at sensationalizing, and then when you read down, usually after the third paragraph, you'll find the real story is there. And I call them sexy modals. They use a lot of modals. What China could do, what China might do, what China is doing is very different to what China has the ability to do. So yeah, it's a lot of modality written in. Then of course the headline is a question mark. If the headline has a question mark on the end, usually you can say the answer is no. China, no. Is Russia, no. So yeah, it's just a good headline, and they're getting very good at it. They've become very good at it. The ABC's excellent at doing this. Headline doesn't really reflect the story at all. Yeah, that's a good conversation to have.
Yeah. I'll give you the last word, Dr. Rich.
Well, look, yes. I mean, I personally don't read much Australian media these days or watch much of it. And, I recommend it for one's health. I mean, I guess I spent 30 years in government, and obviously you sort of read the media every day in that context. So, I feel like I've done my dues with the Australian media, but it's certainly a huge amount of what you read is orchestrated, manipulated stories in various ways. And because I used to write the media releases and see them in the journalist news, and you used to read them and so how long will it take before I spot a mistake, kind of thing. So yeah, you really do need to read all journalism, especially Australian journalism, with a pretty critical eye.
Can I ask one quick question of Dr. Rich? Is there an Australian media that you do trust?
Well, I generally try to go to source information rather than rely on journalists these days. And also because, I largely focus on international issues these days, just in terms of my own interests. I don't tend to focus on things so much. So I tend to really read the newspapers or magazines or online sites or whatever as a way to get to whatever the real story, find out where the real information will be, rather than, so use it as a gateway, I guess, to this is happening. Well, where's the real information about this, rather than rely on the journalist interpretation of, whether that's in the alternative media or in the mainstream media. But But that's also, I mean, I guess that was what my professional career was about as well. So I still feel pretty comfortable navigating that sort of space. But I mean, that tends to be what I do.
Yeah,
thank you.
That's a good answer. Thank you very much, Dr. Rees. Thank you, Jerry, for taking the time
Thank
to
you,
talk
Adam.
to me. I will stop recording now.